they could have a quasi mini primary right now,
Yeah.
even if it's only for 4 weeks or so. And it pisses me off that Kamala Harris now is the anointed nominee.
Yeah.
I don't know, by the way, I don't know if Kamala Harris is the best choice. I don't think she is, but she should be able to prove herself over the next 4 weeks or so. And if you say it's not enough time, you know what? It's not perfect, but have a bunch of debates, town halls, do a million interviews, her and all the other people that have a shot. She should not just be able to get it. And that's what actually pisses me off even more right now than not having the primary.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at other democracies, France, they announced they were going to have parliamentary elections and like in 5 weeks or so. And they had 2 rounds of elections and they did it all in about 5 weeks. UK elections were similar. That's how their systems work. They call elections and then like 6 weeks later they vote. So the idea that you can't do it, and here we're not even talking about voting. Nobody is going to go to their precinct and vote. We're just talking about a couple thousand delegates who all together in the same space. So you don't even have to do the logistics of having, a 50 state election. It would be a couple thousand people in a convention hall. I think there's a lot to talk about with what you said. First of all, I think had Biden dropped out immediately after the debate that weekend, and you had that extra 3 weeks. So now you're talking about at that point, you would have had 7 weeks instead of 4. I
Mhm.
think that we may have been in a different world at that point. I think you would have seen at least one of the main contenders, if not more, jump in. And I think the pressure to have a primary would have been more for 2 reasons. First of all, you would have just had more time. Secondly, Harris would not have had those last 3 weeks where she has smartly consolidated the base behind the scenes. Clearly, there's been conversations, but also she's been out publicly a lot in the last 3 weeks. Now, part of that's because it's a campaign, but also part of it is she knew, I think, this was an audition. And she
Mhm.
did pretty well. And the reviews were pretty good. And so that helped her consolidate. So what would I prefer? I would have preferred, and I've said this all year, an open process. Even if that leads to Kamala, I think she's stronger for it because then she's beaten somebody, right? She's earned it to some degree. I think that's better for her than a coronation. But also, I just think from a purely Democratic standpoint, that replicates the real primary. You obviously can't do a real primary now, but that replicates it in a way that a coronation certainly doesn't. So, in terms of the democracy argument, the Democratic argument, I think that gives you at least some semblance
Mhm.
of a system. So, that's what I would prefer. Now, I do respect the argument that if you're saying, okay, from a purely practical strategic standpoint, what puts Kamala Harris or what puts the Democratic ticket in a better position? Is it a coronation when you have her rivals all come out in the last day and make a decision not to run? Remember, Gretchen Whitmer could have run. Gavin Newsom could have run. They could have done it. They chose not to. They saw the writing on the wall clearly. But so everyone getting together behind her and the excitement we've seen and the fact she's raised $50 million in a day, is that better, or would it be better to have them fight it out? And possibly the downside of that is you go to the convention with it undecided and she doesn't get it. And all of a sudden the party fractures. And maybe African American voters, maybe others say, what the hell is going on? How did you take this from Kamala, who is clearly the heir apparent? I'm not supporting the ticket. I'm bowing out. I'm not going to work as hard. I'm not going to give as much money. And so you could see that as that's real and that's possible. And so from a strategic standpoint, I think you can make an argument which one puts your eventual ticket in a better position. In terms of primaries, I think one thing we have to remember too is part of the whole argument about democracy and the coup thing, I think conflates two things that are not quite the same. A general election is never been in American history the same thing as a primary. It isn't today. It certainly has not been. Like in 1860, Abraham Lincoln won the Republican nomination on like the 20th ballot. Nobody voted for him. Like people in the convention hall did. They didn't have primaries. Nobody said, oh, his election is invalid. Like in 1944, think about this. FDR was dying. Like he would end up dying like 6 months into his term. He was in a bad way. The Democratic Party nominated him in a smoke-filled room. Nobody voted for FDR in a primary, but yet nobody argued that 1944 election was illegitimate. And then what happened over time is we had a combination system of primaries and delegates. Democrats had super delegates for a very long time up until 2016 that were elected officials, party bosses. They voted for the nominee at the convention, and nobody said it was illegitimate. In 1980, um, Jimmy Carter had won the primaries, but Ted Kennedy challenged him at the
Mhm.
convention, and delegates were in many states free to vote for whoever they wanted to. They weren't bound by the results of the primary, but that wasn't considered to be illegitimate. And the reason is because parties have always selected their nominees in the way that they set up the rules to select them. The delegates are decided. Some states it's winner take all. Some states it's proportional. People change the rules all the time. Donald Trump's people changed the rules here in California, where I live, this year. So the California's delegates to the convention were decided based on winner take all, not proportional
Mhm.
representation. So if you won by one vote, even if you got 30% of the vote, you got every delegate. Is that democratic? Of course not. But it also isn't illegitimate, right? Because those are the rules the party sets up. That's what parties do. They set the rules for how the delegates decide who the candidate is. That is not the same thing as a general election where everybody votes and we all know how the voting works, and we all we should at least accept the results of those elections. So I think there is a little bit of conflating general elections to party primaries, presidential primaries. And again, I'm not saying I don't like the primary system. I want to be clear. I wish it were more democratic and more open. But as a caucus, which Republicans have, that's not democratic at all. The only people who vote are people who could show up and stay there for 2 or 3 hours at a specific time at a specific place. That's the opposite of total democracy. So I just think that people either don't understand or they do understand, but they're not mentioning that party primaries are completely different from general elections. And that's another reason why the whole coup argument is just ridiculous. Parties always decide who their nominees are. They do it in a variety of different ways, many of which are not democratic at all.
Yeah, I'm not somebody who says coup at all when it comes to what's happened here with the Democrats. Again, the coup attempt was 2020 fake electors calling up Michigan, calling up Georgia, in my opinion, and they're not the same. So I would never use coup in terms of what happened with the Democrats, but it is fair to say, I don't even know if fishy is the right word. Not fair. It does reek of when you kind of said the smoke filled room, the power brokers. It does reek of that. It feels unfair. It feels undemocratic, even if it's not a
Yeah.
coup. And I understand. By the way, it's obvious if you're on the right, you take your biggest weakness, which is January 6th, besides abortion, but you take your biggest weakness, January 6th, and you try to neutralize it and say, no, the real coup is what the Democrats are doing right now. So I totally understand that from a strategy standpoint. But my thing is like, if you were just looking at this election, I can understand how people on the right would say, well, we at least did it more fair. Like Donald Trump didn't show up to the debates, but he didn't show up to the debates because he didn't have to, because
Yeah.
his lead was so big that it didn't matter, right? And the Democrats didn't even give you an opportunity.
Yeah.
And again, there's a lot of weirdness that happened, but at the end of the day, if Kamala Harris ends up being the nominee, myself, I think still, I'm a registered Democrat. I will feel like I didn't really have an opportunity at all to
Right.
pick the nominee or
Yeah.
or
You
even see a
didn't.
process. I know.
Right.
I literally didn't. And then I also didn't even get to see any type of real process.
Yeah.
Like I understand I thought Trump versus DeSantis would be a dogfight. If you asked me 2 years ago or 18 months ago, I really did. I thought Trump versus DeSantis would be really, really interesting. It wasn't. We didn't even bring up DeSantis at the end. It was Nikki Haley, but at least the opportunity was there for DeSantis to take it. It was
Yeah.
there for Haley to take it, and she couldn't. And so, I don't know. I just I just feel like I understand that if it's Kamala, most Democrats are going to rally behind her, but like I don't like that. I don't like the way it's gone down at all. And honestly, like Kamala Harris personally, she doesn't inspire me that much, but also we talked about this the other day. I'm not the person that pays so close attention to politics all the time. Like, I haven't seen a lot from Kamala Harris. And by the way, I watched her give a speech today at the White House, and it looked very presidential. Now, obviously, they're rolling her out there. She's essentially going to be the president for the next month or the next 4 or 5 months, right? Like, she can use that bully pulpit, even though she's not going to be the president. It's going to feel like Kamala Harris is the president of the United States until the election. But for me, I don't know. Like, I wish she would have proven herself. And that's where the primary process and the debates and all of that, I would feel much better about Kamala Harris if we had that opportunity. So to me, I'm like, okay, she's going to be the nominee. Maybe she wins. I'm not super excited right now unless she can make me excited about this over the next
Yeah.
4 weeks.
No, I agree. And as I've said throughout this whole year, my preference would be if Biden showed he couldn't do it, which clearly he has now, my preference was an open competition because I think there is risk in that. But I think the reward is potentially you get the strongest possible ticket, which is ultimately what you should be doing. Plus, it creates a ton of media attention and buzz and excitement around your candidate, whoever it ends up being. So I think that would have been the best way to do it. That said, remember, people are making decisions here. Nobody is saying to Gretchen Whitmer, or Josh Shapiro, or Wes Moore, or Gavin Newsom, you can't run against Kamala. In fact, the opposite is true. Everyone knows they can. And the fact that they are choosing not to, yes, it does speak to a coalescing, but it also speaks to the perceived power of Harris. I mentioned earlier, nobody challenged. Look, RFK Jr. is a unique candidate, but he's certainly not well thought of by large parts of the Democratic base. Let's
Mhm.
say that, right? And he hasn't been for a while. No serious Democrat challenged Joe Biden, just as no serious Republican challenged Trump in
Oh,
2016.
Dean Phillips?
Yeah, right. Apologies, D. Phillips. No serious Democrat challenged Barack Obama in 2012 or George W. Bush in 2008. They could have. There was no law stopping them. Why didn't they? Because they knew that president, that incumbent president, was powerful and had the party behind them. They had all the endorsements. They had the donor class, and it would be really hard to win. And it might damage their prospects to try to win later. That's essentially what Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer and others are deciding now. They're looking around. Nobody's stopping them from running, but they're saying, you know what? Kamala's proven she has the donors behind her, the elites of the party behind her, and I could do it, but is it worth the risk? And would it damage me for the future if I did? So I wish they would have. I wish at least one of them would have gotten in, but I don't think it's a major scandal, for lack of a better term, that they didn't. I think this is how parties work. Parties send signals of who is powerful. If donors were coming out, and I did see one donor today, there was a prominent donor in Florida who said, I'm not backing Kamala Harris, I'm out. I think it should be somebody else. I want somebody more moderate, right? If that person was more representative of the donor class, somebody would be in there fighting Kamala. If there were high profile politicians who came out and said, I think this should be an open process and I want somebody else. If Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries or others came out and said that, there would be somebody else. Parties send signals about how strong a candidate is. And all the signals are Harris is strong. Now, are they making the right calculation? That's a different question. That's more of a judgment call question. But it's not unique that parties coalesce around somebody strong and send the signal that you might not want to do this. Yeah, that you can do it, but it might not be good for your long-term prospects.
Is she strong though, or does she make the most sense because she was already on the ticket and the whole war chest argument and the fact that we're running out of time? Like, to me, I agree with you. If Joe Biden would have stepped down like the Friday after the debate, now you essentially have 2 months instead of one. So I don't know that Kamala Harris is actually that strong in a general election versus Donald Trump. I think she's strong because Democrats feel like with the time they have and the money situation that she has to be strong. That's my take. So
Right. We
I
need her to be
also
strong.
yeah, we need her to be strong, so we're going to get behind her.